Joining us now are two very interesting figures, two people much smarter than I am about all the subjects that we're going to be talking about. Firstly, Janneke Oostrom, you are a professor of work and organizational behavior, if I'm getting that right, at Tilburg University. What does that entail?
Oh, that I teach work and organizational psychology courses, and I do research within that field. And my research particularly focuses on recruitment and selection.
Which is why you're here, so we're very pleased to have you. And then also sitting opposite of me is Mihai Rotaru, if I'm getting your name right.
Almost.
Almost right, Rotaru. You are the head of research and development at TextKernel. Now, what does a day in the life of Mihai look like?
Oh, that's going to be very complicated to get into that detail.
Let's go.
But I can tell you that my responsibility is to lead the research and development department, and that's the department that develops the AI components that power the products that TextKernel is selling in the HR market.
Very interesting. And that's something we'll talk about further. We'll briefly go to Martijn because we realized we started this show and Martijn is standing next to me. Suddenly he's gone somewhere else. Martijn, where are you exactly?
Yes, I'm here in the cockpit with all my dashboards and screens to monitor the polls and all the questions you are going to ask, hopefully. Before we continue, we would like to mention that this live talk show wasn't possible without the support of our partners, 8Fonds and TextKernel. So during this talk show, you can ask your questions, and it will be a private chat, so only I can see those questions. And what we try to do is, of course, we try to ask them to the guests we have. We have several guests, several rounds of guests. So in case you have a question, don't forget to mention if it's for whom of the speakers of the guests it is. And in case we are not able to ask all the questions, we will do it afterwards in one of our podcasts. So maybe it's a great time also to do a first poll, Jasper.
Let's go for it.
Yes? Okay, the first poll I have is how many hours a week do you use ChatGPT for work? So I will start the poll, so it will be depending on your device next to the screen or beneath the screen. Okay.
Interesting, yeah, and I think it's important to note, like, we're trying to do an interactive event. I know you realise the talk shows, just watch it for an hour and a half, but we want you to participate, ask questions to those who are here at the table, or for me, or for Martijn. Anyone you want to ask a question for, please do. But it's an interesting poll. ChatGPT is obviously sort of democratized AI as a whole. It's made it a subject that people are now suddenly interested in talking about, but ChatGPT specifically. 2 questions for you guys. First time you ever used it, what did you use it for, and how many hours do you use it for your work? I'll go to you first, Mihai.
Yeah, so I think I started using it somewhere at the end of 2022, and more, of course, as all of us in 2023, and there was a very funny interaction that I had with it. So I was actually working on some really programming problem.
Yeah.
Right? You want in a text to basically remove all the empty lines.
Okay.
And I asked ChatGPT, can you write for me the code to do that? And he wrote the code and explained nicely why it did that and so on. And you look, wow, this is impressive. And also the interesting thing is where you look closer and it's like, oh, but it's actually missing some things. And then you tell, hey, but it's not fully correct. It has this problem. Oh, right, yes. I made this problem, this error. Here's how to correct it.
Right.
It wasn't still correct. So it was a very interesting interaction. It kind of shows the pros and cons of this technology. And it's only going to get better.
I love how you just went straight into the technical side. I think it's definitely speak. Janneke, for you, what was the first time you ever used it?
Yeah, I think it was somewhere in the fall of 2023, and we were a bit forced to check what students can do with it, because we have all sorts of writing assignments. And yeah, we need to know what ChatGPT would give and whether they could pass the course using ChatGPT. So at the moment we're checking everything. from a student perspective.
I'd imagine you'd have to, because there's loads of students just putting a nice prompt in there and saying, well, here's my essay, 40 pages long.
Yes, and it's still difficult to check or to be sure whether they used it or not. So we just need to be aware and redesign.
I can imagine. So give us an estimate. How many hours a week do you use it for your work or personal life?
For me, it's an hour, maybe. No, not more than an hour.
Not more
I
than
think
an hour?
so. Not that often.
Yeah, kind of like this, 2-3 hours. But for sure, people in my teams do use it more.
Yeah, you
Yes.
see that with your colleagues?
Yes, and it's not necessarily, for example, for day-to-day tasks, but for projects that they work on. So, for example, we've been using it heavily for our knowledge mining projects.
Right.
So, as most of you know, with technologies like ChatGPT, you have at your fingertips, you actually have knowledge of language and knowledge of the world. So, if you can use that, you can actually speed up many processes.
No, very interesting. Yes, and I think that's the main benefit that people are, if you have to ask an average person on the street, what is something that you use AI for? Speeding stuff up, efficiency. It's all about efficiency. But if we were to zoom out for a moment and look at the world of AI in recruiting as a whole, and what AI developments have you seen happen in the world? Because we're talking about, this show is called AI in Recruitment. I'd imagine if we started this 5 years ago, people would have gone, well, that's not very interesting. What is that all about? But that'd be interesting to see, Janneke. What have you seen happen in the world?
Yeah, what I have experienced is that it's being used more and more to score candidate responses, for example, in digital interviews, or to score resumes or LinkedIn profiles, or perhaps behaviors in this particular simulation or serious game. And I do see advantages of using AI for that purpose, because it increases the standardization. And we're indeed also doing research on that particular application. So we're at the moment looking at the value of using AI to score these digital interviews. Can it assess personality, and can it do that as well as a HR consultant?
Yeah, and also I think much of it revolves around, what does the candidate make of that? Because we can talk for hours about AI and how it can seamlessly and effortlessly make everything better and more efficient. But from a candidate point of view, what do you reckon, Mihai?
I think we should all ask the following question. Do you want ChatGPT to decide your professional life? So it's a
good question, a fair question.
It's a very interesting question, and I think the jury is still out. And there are actually lots of regulations also coming in. Because AI can do lots of good, but also sometimes can do big mistakes. And we actually have quite some examples of AI going a bit rogue, also in the recruitment domain, but also in other domains.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you've been working on AI for a long time, because we may think this is a new subject, but for you, this has been part of your life for a long time now. Is that also kind of frustrating then? Because as you mentioned before, I think off screen, 20 years that text kernel has built its own AI, and now suddenly everyone is using a different form of AI. But how do you look at that from a sort of research and development point of view?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So I think a lot of people might not realize it, but they, especially in recruitment, they've been using AI for 20-something years. Textkernel, for example, was probably the first company that built an AI system that can read resumes and save that time-consuming task of typing a resume and putting it in a database. So AI has been actually in recruitment for a long time. And the AI that we've been building so far has been the specific AI for specific tasks.
Right.
With new technologies, of course, like ChatGPT, all these large language models, this democratizes access to AI. But what we see is we're still learning what is the best way to use this technology in products. And what do I mean by that? Anybody can write a prompt to achieve something quick, but that's a proof of concept. So how do you make sure that what comes out of it has the right quality? How do you deal with quality issues? How do you deal with very important topics of bias and transparency? And I think we're going to discuss a lot about using AI for matching people and jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the main users. I believe we've got a question from the viewers. Martijn, can you shed a light on that?
Yeah, first I want to give some poll results. We don't have to worry yet about ChatGPT addictions, because most people, 61% says 1 to 2 hours a week. We've got some 7% 6 to 10 hours, 1% 11 till 15 hours, and even some people who said 0 hours a week. So it's okay.
All over the
Not
place.
that
Yeah, it's you never know what to expect with these polls, because you think to yourself, I obviously think to myself, how many hours do I use ChatGPT or Bard or any type of AI, generative AI tooling? Has that surprised you, those results, or is that roughly what you expected?
Yeah, I've never thought of it before, but I would expect a high variance in that particular use of ChatGPT, because it really depends on the type of job.
Across your students, maybe 10 hours a week?
Probably. No, I don't know. And even that will vary, of course, depending on how interested they are in technology, and also how serious they are in terms of their studies, I think.
Yeah, and I think it just varies broadly, because, we're focusing on recruitment, very specific something. But also, if you look at my parents, I don't think they've touched ChatGPT because they're like, boy, I don't think we need it. And I go, well, but you've used forms of it integrated into other stuff. Like you watch Netflix, so there's an algorithm behind it. Oh yeah, that's right. So you never really know. But if we look at AI products as a whole, and we look at how essentially these tools are built, another element pops up, and that's called legislation. And if you, like me, want to learn more about the way AI is regulated in Europe, you look at the AI Act, and you start Googling, because I'm a researcher, I'm a journalist, so I tend to Google quite a bit of stuff, and I came across the name Brando Benifei. And Brando Benifei, try to pronounce his name correctly, is an Italian politician who's been a member of the European Parliament for about 10 years, and he's one of the co-rapporteurs on the first ever AI Act in Europe. AI Act, try saying that 15 times. We're here live here from Utrecht, but I was able to talk to Brando last week in Brussels.
My name is Brando Benifei. I am a second-term MEP, so I've been a member of European Parliament for almost 10 years, and I am the rapporteur together with another colleague, so we have been in 2 colleagues, me and another one, the leading negotiators with the Council, so with the governments of the EU, for the text of the first ever horizontal legislation in the world on AI, that is the European AI Act, the AI regulation of the European Union. We started working on that based on political resolutions and a series of hearings in a special committee on artificial intelligence, but then this turned into a legislation on which we worked for around 2 years, and now we are in the final stages for it to become a real law of the Union.
If you had to explain the law that you've been working on in sort of subtle terms, what do you think it will do specifically for recruitment?
Well, the law in general is focused on reducing risks by putting in place protocols of risk reduction, and in this way increase trust and support for people and enlargement of opportunities. So the law is to support the choice of using AI, is not to limit it, but to put it under clear rules, focusing on more sensitive areas. Not all AI use cases, but those that are more impactful for health, safety, and fundamental rights of people. So recruitment and the workplace in general are considered to be sensitive and so high risk, and so under the stricter regulation. Because, for example, I give you one example that is very obvious, that is one of the simple examples we have been looking at to develop these rules is the use of curriculum selection programs that have learned to discriminate women. This is a classic example. They exist, they are used, because they've learned that for certain type of jobs, whatever qualifications and experience a woman has, she should never be chosen, because they learned that by the data they were trained with. So they can learn to be even more prejudicial than human beings if they are trained with certain type of data. And so with our regulation, we would prevent that because we would undergo this kind of, we will put these systems under a conformity assessment that would also entail a verification of the quality and appropriateness of the data used to train the system.
Right, and so much is about the data that you put in, because often the debate in recruitment is, well, you know, this AI that will be more biased than human beings, and the sort of AI fanatics will say, no, actually, humans are biased, the data is biased, so therefore, you know, trying to work with AI can only enhance the process. But what is your view on making sure that recruitment, in whatever form it's done, that with AI it could perhaps be less biased or more biased? What do you lean towards?
I'm convinced that it can be much less biased. Clearly, we cannot completely eliminate these risks, but the way we have designed our regulation, it will entail checks that will need to be performed following a standard that is now being developed. So that's why even if the law will be approved as a law of the Union in April 2024, it will take around 2 years before this will be fully applied, because we need standards to be developed, for example, on quality and appropriateness of data. That is crucial to look at how the training is done. At the same time, I want to be clear that we will start a clearly imperfect but partial application of the law with a voluntary anticipated compliance procedure for businesses and institutions before the standard is developed. So we will support businesses and institutions with a program that the European Commission will develop called the AI Pact, that would help enacting the AI Act before it becomes a mandatory law. So it will accompany businesses and institutions to comply. In this case, that for the example I made, to comply with the obligations to check the appropriateness and quality of data used to train their systems, including systems used to perform recruitment duties.
A very big thanks to Mr. Benifei and his wonderful assistant Andrea for helping us arrange the interview, because if you can't get Brussels to come here, you might as well go to Brussels. It was a really good experience to visit the European Commission and to just get to quiz them on all these things, because the AI Act is here and it's probably here to stay. Now to you both, how do you look at this?
Yes, it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's a crucial topic in applying AI in general in practice. Before I go into that, I actually owe you an answer to whether it's a frustrating for us, this new technology. I think the feeling that I would use is actually it's an excitement, because it opens many opportunities of what can be done with this new type of AI, like, for example, generating vacancies and so on. And that actually brings me into this topic and our thinking about the topic of responsible AI. So we believe that AI should be used not to replace a human decision, but actually to support and facilitate a human decision. So it's very important that AI is designed with this principle in mind. The European Act that you just heard about, it's not the first regulation. There is actually one regulation. It's already in effect, and that's the New York City AI law, which looked exactly at the problem that was discussed by Bruno, which is, are the systems that you use in recruitment for matching, are they biased or not? And I'm proud to say that we are probably one of the first companies that have our match system audited, and we passed flawlessly with that. So we're looking forward to more of these checks and balances happening about AI in practice, and there is a lot of research happening on this topic. So I'm happy to talk more about this, but maybe Janneke has also.
Yeah, what do you reckon about this new AI Act in Europe?
Yeah, it's much needed, because indeed there's so many developments in terms of AI. There's not that much research, especially in the field of work and organizational psychology, much more in computer science. So we don't know enough about it and the consequences in terms of whether it predicts any relevant behaviors, whether it causes any bias. And what I think is also now an issue is that we have all these requirements for other tests and questionnaires that we use in recruitment and selection. They're not laws at the moment, although there's a law proposal, and hopefully they will be implemented to prevent discrimination in selection. But for example, the Dutch Institute of Psychologists has this committee of test and testing, the COTAN, who can evaluate testing questionnaires. But there's no such thing at the moment to assess AI tools. And the question is whether the current regulations also of this COTAN apply to AI tools. So there are rules needed, there are laws needed, there's more research needed, and I think this is a good stimulator for that.
Yeah, definitely. And you feel like, with the technology booming as it is, you almost have to wonder, like, was it too late, or has it come too late? But I think it's come to a place, it's come at the right time. Obviously, they still need to vote on certain aspects of the law before it takes fully place, and in 2 years' time it would only be integrated. So, but it's something, Martijn, that might be interested to ask our audience, like, what do they make of all of this?
Yes, we've got a poll. So what is your biggest concern regarding AI in recruitment? So you can pick your choice: bias in AI, loss of personal touch, maybe losing your job. So you can vote. And I've got also a question. So how can we make sure that the EU does not commit the same regulation mistakes of the past, where over-regulation pushed tech startups out of Europe into US and China?
That's a big question, but we thank our audience for asking it. Who wants it? Because that's not an easy question to answer. Mihai, you want to take a stab at it?
Ooh, that was a mouthful of question.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a reality that regulation's always behind technology.
Yeah.
That's the way we will have to accept that. So I think the best way to approach it would be, when you make, for example, a selection of what tools you want to use, to ask the questions: was this designed the proper way?
Yeah.
Do you trust that provider? Does that provider have a responsible AI policy or risk management put in place, and so on? This is everything that the EU AI Act will require. So if you're applying any kind of AI in recruitment, you want to satisfy certain requirements. So I think that's some considerations that you should always use.
You're right, I think, and it's easy for us to say from the outside looking in, well, this technology has already happened to the world. Why are the legislators not doing anything to stop it? But I imagine they've got a tough deal of figuring out, which technology they actually need to act on, because we've got VR coming through, AR coming through. They're constantly having to work around, navigate that technology startups that are just building stuff and bringing them to the market. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think in the end, everyone in the process is responsible. So the AI developer, but also the user.
Yeah.
And if in the Netherlands we have the EU AI Act, but perhaps in a few years' time also Dutch legislation on the use of AI, and then it doesn't matter where the AI is coming from. It's the user that needs to be responsible for that choice, and it needs to make sure that it doesn't discriminate, and it does predict relevant behaviors if you're using that. So I think that is the most important thing. and we have this responsibility because we are making decisions about people's lives, people's careers. So it's that important. I find it more important than, or at least I have less knowledge also about what will happen in terms of worldwide developments of AI.
Sure.
But I think the focus on what is the situation in the Netherlands, how can we use it in a responsible way, is the most important one.
Absolutely, and responsibility and fair use has already been mentioned a few times now.
Yeah, and for example, when you design products around AI, I think the first question to ask is AI even the right tool for that job, right? So, and this is in the context that AI, if not properly designed, trained, and evaluated, can contain biases. And there have been, as I mentioned before, there have been multiple examples of that happening. And even more important is the research. It's still in progress of how do you test the bias in, how do you debias AI, and how do you so how do you debias AI, and how do you ensure that you don't have any discrimination? So for example, for applications like generating vacancies or maybe interacting with a candidate, the risk of AI and AI bias is much more limited. But when you use it, for example, for matching people in job, that should be very careful application. In our case, we actually use a very transparent algorithm to do the matching between people and jobs, because this allows full control for the users. They can influence, they can see the reason why that match has been made, and so on. While if you learn from data, you have many issues, including replicating societal biases, issues, AI being very good at picking up the wrong signals sometimes. Yeah. So a lot of bias can happen in practice. I'm not trying to scare people away from AI. I think AI will really empower all of us to do our and especially generative AI, to do our jobs better. Some of the boring things would be automated, and I think that will be actually the trend in 2024 in recruitment, that some of the tasks that before, like contacting, first contact with candidate engagement and so on, and the simple things would be picked up by AI. Yeah. And I think the place for recruiter will be still the same: build a connection and persuade people
to come to work for their company. Yeah, and exactly. Finally, I think that's a good thing to ask you. How do you look at this? Because the future of AI and recruitment, obviously, still much of it relies on whether the legislation will take a full effect. But do you think it'll be a happy marriage in the end?
I think it can be, but what is important is that there is a close collaboration between the work and organizational psychologists, the computer scientists, and the legislators. Because what I see now is that often all this knowledge in the field of personal selection, psychology, is not used in how this AI is built. So we know actually what would be the important traits and skills that you could measure, to what extent people differ on that based on their demographics, and how to best measure that. So, but if that knowledge is not used, it's very likely that you will create more discrimination rather than less. So I really think that collaboration is needed, and then that it can be a happy marriage because it increases the standardization of the process, and research has shown that increases the predictive value and reduces discrimination.
Good. Now, before I ask you the same question, I believe we've got some polling results, Martijn.
Yes, we've got the results. We've got 37% of the viewers say a loss of personal touch is their biggest concern, followed by bias in AI algorithms with 26%. And even 7% is afraid of losing their job. And we got some remarks, very good point, an interesting German article about AI destroying the internet. That's maybe maybe it's interesting to discuss this in one of our podcasts.
We'll save that for one of the podcasts.
For a more positive.
Let's try and keep it uplifting. We're not here to keep it uplifting, but we'll try to end on a positive note. Finally, Mihai, obviously this subject is not new to you again, having worked on it for so long. So I'm inclined to think you'll think it's a happy marriage, and it'll continue to be a happy marriage. But what do you think?
Well, I think behind every happy marriage there are ups and downs. So I think that's what we're all gonna see, and a lot of people are seeing that. So, for example, there is a recent Gartner report saying that well, they expect in 2024 to be some hard learned lessons and some big fines.
Yeah.
So I think it's gonna be yes, a very interesting interplay between this. I think I want to respond to one of the highest concern that was in the polls about personal touch.
Yeah.
I think probably you want to see it more. AI could help you prepare the things, and then you can add the personal touch on top. So I think it's going to become easier actually to add the personal touch if the products are designed the right way.
If the products are designed the right way. Any final remarks from you? The personal touch, what do you reckon?
I think it's unlikely that the whole process will be completely automated. So in any selection process, there will be a personal touch. And I think, and that's also what research has shown, it's very important to explain to the candidate why you're using AI. And if you offer that explanation, they are much more willing to accept its use. So I think there's also an important task there for the recruiter.
Absolutely, and I think the onus is just on those using the technology, those implementing the technology, and also just be able to, like you said, explain it to someone. Because if you can't explain it to someone, then probably what you're doing isn't that good to begin with. But I'd like to thank you both very much. Those were some very interesting insights, and I imagine we can talk for a few more hours. We'll save that for the podcast. So up next, we're heading towards the world of investments, particularly the state of investments in AI in recruiting. And there's standalone tools breaking through. Loads of tech suppliers have integrated AI into their progress, and we've obviously got one here at the table who's done it for years. But it's resulted in a sort of influx of money. And when we talk about the influx of money, we talk about seed money in particular. And I'm good at math, usually had good grades, but I know one person who's far smarter than I am in terms of tracking those investments. And that's what George Laroque has done for years with WorkTech. Now, this talk show is held at approximately 4 or 5 o'clock New York time, where he lives. We thought, let's not ask George to get out of bed at 4 a.m., so we recorded this on Monday.